The first thing Vex learned was that the world wanted to own her. The second thing she learned was that she would rather die than let that happen. She stood in the center of the blood-slicked cage, her chest heaving, her left eye swollen shut, and listened to the roar of 500 strangers who had paid good script to watch an Omega break bones. They did not cheer for her skill. They cheered for the freak show, the biological anomaly, the woman who refused to go into heat and build a nest like every other Omega on the planet. She gave them what they paid for. She drove her fist into her opponent's throat one more time, felt the cartilage give, and watched the massive beta crumple to the concrete floor like a sack of offal. The referee grabbed her arm and raised it high. The crowd lost its collective mind. Vex did not smile. She never smiled after a win. Smiling meant she enjoyed this, and she did not enjoy anything except the numb quiet that came after a fight, when her body was too battered to remember what it was supposed to be. She collected her envelope of crumpled bills and shoved it down the front of her torn tank top. The walk through the tunnel was a gauntlet of grasping hands and whispered offers. An alpha woman with silver hair and predatory eyes blocked her path and said, "You are wasting your potential, little Omega. I could give you a nest that would make you forget every punch you ever threw." Vex looked at her with her one good eye and said nothing. She simply walked around her because words were a luxury she could not afford. Every syllable she wasted was a calorie she could have used to stay upright. Her body was a machine running on spite and black market chemicals, and the machine was breaking down faster than she wanted to admit. The broker's basement reeked of acetone and desperation. The woman behind the table was old enough to have seen the old world, the one before the collapse, when Omegas had rights and suppressants were prescribed by doctors instead of sold by criminals. Her name was Marque, but everyone called her the broker because she brokered the only freedom that mattered. She slid a steel case across the scarred table and said, "You look like death warmed over, Vex. When was the last time you ate a full meal?" Vex did not answer. She counted out her bills with trembling fingers because her hands were still shaking from the adrenaline and the hunger and the low-grade fever that had been gnawing at her bones for 3 weeks. The broker opened the case and revealed 10 vials of amber liquid, the latest formulation of the permanent suppressant. The one that was supposed to kill her heats forever. The one that was also killing her liver, her kidneys, her pancreas, and every other organ that had the audacity to function normally. "This batch is 30% stronger," the broker said, her voice flat and clinical. "Your body has developed a tolerance. The next one will be 40%. After that, I cannot guarantee your heart will keep up." Vex took the case and tucked it under her arm. She did not thank the broker. Gratitude was a transaction she could not afford. She climbed the rusted staircase back to street level and breathed in the night air of a city that had long ago stopped caring about its citizens. The factories loomed like dead giants, their smokestacks silent, their windows shattered. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and then cut off abruptly. That was the sound of someone else's life ending. Vex walked faster. Her apartment was a single room on the 4th floor of a condemned tenement. The elevator had not worked since she was a child. She climbed the stairs by memory, each step a small victory over the weakness that threatened to buckle her knees. Inside, she locked the door and slid the chain across. She sat on the bare mattress and uncapped a vial. The needle was clean. She always made sure of that. She injected the suppressant into her thigh and waited for the familiar numbness to spread through her veins, the chemical blanket that smothered every instinct she was born with. The heat that was due in 10 days would not come. The urge to nest, to gather soft things and scents and build a fortress of comfort, would not come. She would remain herself. She would remain free. But this time, the numbness did not come. Instead, a white-hot spike of pain shot through her spine and exploded behind her eyes. She dropped the syringe and clutched her head, her vision fracturing into shards of light and shadow. Her body convulsed, not with a heat, but with something worse, a rejection. Her own cells were fighting the poison she had pumped into them for a decade. She tried to stand, to reach the door, to call for help she did not want, but her legs gave out and she crashed to the floor. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness swallowed her was the cracked ceiling, the water stain that looked like a map of a country she would never visit. And then she was falling into darkness, falling away from everything she had fought so hard to become. She woke to sunlight, which was impossible because her apartment faced an alley and never saw the sun. She woke to softness, which was also impossible because her mattress was a slab of foam so thin she could feel the floorboards through it. She woke to the scent of lavender and cedar and something warm, something that made her stomach clench with a fear so primal it bypassed her rational mind. She was in a nest. She was in a nest built by someone else, surrounded by pillows and blankets and fabrics that smelled of safety and care. Her first instinct was to scream. Her second instinct was to fight. Her third instinct was to look up and see a woman sitting in a chair across the room, watching her with calm, steady eyes. The woman was an alpha. Vex could smell it, that unmistakable undercurrent of controlled power, the same scent that had made her skin crawl since she was old enough to understand what she was. But this alpha was not posturing. She was not preening. She was simply sitting there, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. "You collapsed in the street," the alpha said, her voice low and even. "I carried you here. You have been unconscious for 16 hours. Vex tried to scramble out of the nest, but her body betrayed her. Her limbs were heavy, her muscles screaming with the aftereffects of the suppressant rejection. She managed to roll onto her side and glare at the alpha with all the hatred she could muster. "Who are you?" she rasped. "What do you want?" The alpha did not flinch. She stood slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "My name is Soul," she said. "I run a sanctuary for people who are trying to escape the dynamic system. You are not my prisoner. You are not my property. You are not my mate. You're a guest, and you can leave the moment you can walk. But I would advise you to stay until the tremors stop." She turned and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. "There is water and food on the table. No strings attached. I do not do strings." And then she was gone, leaving Vex alone in a nest she had never asked for, in a room that smelled like safety, with a body that was finally starting to understand that it had been fighting the wrong enemy all along. Vex lay in the nest for a full hour after Soul left, her body trembling with the aftershocks of whatever had happened to her. The softness beneath her was an assault on every principle she had built her life around. She hated the way the blankets cradled her aching muscles. She hated the way the pillows supported her head without her having to ask. She hated the way her traitorous body relaxed into the comfort despite every scream of protest from her mind. This was what Omegas did. This was the trap. They built nests and they stayed in them, and they waited for alphas to come and claim them, and they called it happiness. She had seen it happen to her mother. She had seen it happen to her sister. She had watched them both wither into shadows of themselves, their identities erased by the overwhelming tide of biological imperative. She would not become them. She would die first. But dying did not seem to be on the agenda today. Her legs were too weak to carry her more than a few steps. She made it to the edge of the nest and collapsed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room spun around her, and she had to close her eyes against the vertigo. She could smell the alpha everywhere, that calm, steady scent that should have triggered her fight or flight response, but somehow did not. That was the most disturbing part. Soul did not smell like a threat. Soul smelled like safety, and that was more terrifying than any amount of aggression could have been. Aggression, she understood. She had built her entire existence around responding to aggression with greater violence. But kindness? Kindness was a weapon she had no defense against. The door opened and Soul entered carrying a tray of food. Vex tried to snarl at her, but what came out was a pathetic rasp that barely qualified as speech. Soul set the tray on the table and stepped back, giving Vex a wide berth. The gesture was so deliberate, so carefully calculated to avoid any appearance of dominance, that Vex found herself momentarily speechless. She had never met an alpha who did not try to assert control in the first 30 seconds of interaction. Soul just stood there, waiting, her hands visible and open at her sides. There was no posturing, no scent marking, no casual invasion of personal space. It was unnerving. "I am not going to eat your food," Vex said, her voice steadier now. "I am not going to stay in your nest. I am not going to be your charity case. Soul nodded slowly, as if Vex had made a perfectly reasonable point. That is your choice, she said. The food will be here if you change your mind. The door is unlocked. You can leave whenever you feel strong enough. But you should know that your body is going through a significant withdrawal. The suppressants you have been taking are not compatible with human biology in the long term. Your organs are struggling. If you walk out now and take another dose, you might not survive the next collapse. Vex wanted to argue, wanted to tell this smug alpha that she knew her own body better than anyone, but the words would not come. Because Soul was right. She could feel the damage in every cell of her body, the accumulated poison that had been keeping her alive and killing her at the same time. Why do you care? Vex finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I am nobody to you. I am just some random Omega you found in the street. Why do you care if I live or die? Soul's expression shifted, something flickering behind her eyes that might have been pain. Because I used to be where you are, she said. I used to fight my biology with every ounce of my strength. I used to hate myself for what I was. I spent years running from my own nature, and it almost destroyed me. I do not want that for you. Vex stared at her, trying to find the lie, the manipulation, the angle. But there was nothing. Just a woman who had been through the same fire and had come out the other side. It was the most terrifying thing Vex had ever encountered. She ate the food because her body demanded it, because she was too weak to refuse. The soup was warm and savory, and it settled in her stomach like a foreign object she did not know how to process. She had not eaten a proper meal in months. The bread was fresh, which was impossible in this city, which meant Soul had access to resources that were beyond the reach of ordinary people. She watched Vex eat from across the room, not staring, just present. It was strange to be observed without being objectified. Vex did not know what to do with the absence of expectation. She finished the soup and pushed the bowl away, her hands steadier now, her vision clearer. She tested her legs and found that they would support her weight if she moved slowly. She stood up, swaying slightly, and looked around the room properly for the first time. It was large and airy, with windows that let in actual sunlight. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and there were plants in the corners, real plants with green leaves that required care and attention. The nest she had been lying in was built in a corner of the room, but it was not the only thing in the space. There were bookshelves filled with worn paperbacks, a desk with a lamp, a comfortable armchair that looked like it had been mended many times. It was a home. It was the kind of home that Vex had never allowed herself to imagine, because imagining it would have been the first step toward wanting it. And wanting it would have meant admitting that there was something missing from her life. I am leaving, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Soul did not try to stop her. She simply nodded and said, "The sanctuary is open to you if you change your mind. We are located in the old textile district, the building with the blue door. You cannot miss it." Vex walked to the door, her legs shaking with every step, and pulled it open. The hallway beyond was clean and well lit, another impossibility in this city. She took a step forward and then paused, her hand still on the doorframe. She could not bring herself to leave without saying something, without acknowledging the strange generosity she had been shown. "Thank you," she forced out, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Soul did not respond with platitudes or promises. She simply said, "You are welcome," and let Vex walk away. The street outside was familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The same cracked pavement, the same looming factories, the same gray sky that never seemed to clear. But something had shifted in Vex's perception, some fundamental piece of her worldview that had been cracked open by the experience of being treated like a person rather than a problem to be solved. She walked back to her apartment on autopilot, her body remembering the route even as her mind churned with questions she did not want to answer. She climbed the stairs, entered her bare room, and collapsed onto her thin mattress. The suppressants were still in their case, untouched. She stared at them for a long time, her fingers itching to uncap a vial and inject the poison that had kept her free for so many years. But she did not. Something held her back. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. She stayed in her apartment for 3 days, riding out the withdrawal with nothing but willpower and the memory of Soul's calm voice. Her body raged against her, heats that were not quite heats, fever that came and went in waves, a bone-deep ache that made her want to scream. She did not scream. She had never screamed. She endured. It was what she did best, enduring the impossible because the alternative was surrender. On the fourth day, she realized she was out of food and out of options. Her money was gone, spent on the suppressants that were now sitting in their case like a monument to her self-destruction. She could not fight in her current condition. She could not work. She could not do anything except lie on her mattress and stare at the ceiling and think about the blue door. She went back to the sanctuary because she had nowhere else to go. She told herself it was temporary, just until she got her strength back, just until she could figure out what to do next. She told herself she was not surrendering. But when she knocked on the blue door and Soul opened it without hesitation, without triumph, without any of the smug satisfaction that Vex had braced herself for, something in her chest cracked open just a little bit wider. Soul did not say, "I told you so." She did not say, "Welcome back." She simply stepped aside and let Vex enter, and that simple act of grace was more devastating than any act of aggression could have been. Vex did not know how to be grateful. She did not know how to accept kindness without expecting a price. But she was learning. Slowly, painfully, she was learning. The sanctuary was larger than Vex had initially realized. Soul led her through a maze of corridors and common rooms, past doorways that opened into spaces filled with people of all designations, all ages, all walking the same tightrope between who they were born as and who they wanted to become. Vex kept her head down, her arms crossed over her chest, her entire body radiating a stay-away energy that she had perfected over years of practice. But the people she passed did not try to engage her. They nodded politely, or they did not acknowledge her at all. It was the strangest thing she had ever experienced. A place where omegas were not prey, where alphas were not predators, where betas were not invisible. It felt like a dream she had never allowed herself to have. Soul gave her a room on the third floor, small but clean, with a window that looked out onto a courtyard where someone had planted flowers. Flowers were impossible in this city, but there they were, defiant splashes of color against the gray stone. Vex stood at the window for a long time, staring at the impossible blooms, trying to understand how this place existed in a world that had long ago abandoned beauty. She heard Soul's voice behind her, quiet and unobtrusive. "The room is yours for as long as you need it. There are no expectations, no obligations. You can stay, you can leave, you can do whatever you need to do." Vex did not turn around. She could not bear to look at the woman who offered her freedom without strings, because strings were the only currency she understood. "You do not know me," Vex said, her voice flat. "You do not know what I have done. The people I have hurt. The things I have done to survive." Soul was silent for a moment, and then she said, "I do not need to know. I do not judge people by their pasts. I judge them by what they do with the present." Vex finally turned, her eyes blazing with a fury she could not contain. "What if I do not want to do anything with the present? What if I just want to disappear, to cease to exist, to stop being what I am?" Soul met her gaze without flinching, without pity, without any of the patronizing sympathy that Vex had been braced for. "Then that is your choice," Soul said. "But I would ask you to consider that perhaps what you are is not what you think you are." That conversation stayed with Vex for days, echoing through her mind like a question she could not answer. She spent her time in the sanctuary avoiding everyone, reading books from the common library, eating meals in her room rather than at the communal table. The withdrawal symptoms continued, but they were less severe now, more like a dull ache than a sharp pain. She could feel her body changing, shifting into something she did not recognize. The suppressants had kept her in a state of suspended animation, and now that she was off them, her biology was asserting itself in ways that terrified her. She found herself looking at soft fabrics with a longing she could not explain. She found herself arranging her pillows in a specific configuration, and then she would catch herself and throw them across the room in disgust. On the seventh day, her heat arrived. It came without warning, a tsunami of sensation that knocked her to her knees in the middle of her room. She had forgotten what it felt like, the overwhelming wave of warmth and need and desperate vulnerability. She had been suppressing her heats for so long that the memory had faded, and now it returned with a vengeance that left her gasping on the floor. She crawled to the door and tried to lock it, but her fingers were shaking too hard to manage the mechanism. She heard footsteps in the hallway and she braced herself for the inevitable, for the alpha who would smell her distress and come to claim her. That was how it always happened. That was the rule of the world. But Soul did not come to claim her. Instead, Vex heard a door slam somewhere down the hall, the sound of locks clicking into place. And then she heard Soul's voice, muffled but clear, calling through the walls. "I am in the building across the courtyard," Soul said. "I can hear you, but I cannot reach you. You are safe. You are in control. This is your heat, not mine. I will not come near you until you tell me it is safe." Vex wanted to scream at her, to tell her that this was not how it worked, that alphas were supposed to take what they wanted, that the whole point of being an alpha was the ability to dominate. But the words would not come. All that came were sounds, broken and desperate, as her body betrayed her in the worst possible way. She lay on the floor of her room for hours, maybe days, she could not tell. The heat consumed her, burned through her, stripped away every layer of control she had built around herself. She screamed and she cried and she begged for something, she did not know what. But Soul stayed in her building, her voice a constant presence through the walls, talking to Vex about anything and everything. About the weather, about the books she was reading, about the flowers in the courtyard, and how they had been planted by a former resident who had since moved on to a better life. Soul talked and talked, her voice steady and calm, and Vex clung to it like a lifeline. It was the only thing that kept her from drowning. On the second day of her heat, Vex managed to crawl to the wall and press her ear against it. Soul's voice was clearer there, intimate in a way that made Vex's chest ache. "I am not going to come to you," Soul said. "I am not going to take advantage of you. I know what you think of alphas. I know you believe we are all predators, all selfish, all driven by the same base instincts. But I am telling you that it does not have to be that way. An alpha can choose to be something different. An omega can choose to be something different. Choice is the only thing that matters." Vex pressed her forehead against the cool wall and let the tears come. She had not cried in years, had not allowed herself that weakness, but the heat had stripped her down to nothing, and there was nowhere left to hide. "I do not know how to choose," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I have been running for so long. I do not know how to stop." Soul was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "You do not have to know how. You just have to want to learn." It was the simplest thing anyone had ever said to her, and it broke her open in ways she could not have anticipated. She wanted to learn. She wanted to stop running. She wanted to find out who she was without the poison, without the fear, without the constant battle against her own nature. The heat lasted for 3 days. On the third day, the fever broke and Vex found herself lying in a pool of sweat and tears, her body exhausted but somehow peaceful. She had never experienced a heat without suppressants before, had never allowed herself to feel the full force of what she was. It had been terrifying and overwhelming and painful, but it had also been honest. There was no deception in a heat, no pretense, no performance. She had been stripped down to her essential self, and that self had not been the monster she expected. That self had been scared and lonely and desperate for connection, but it had also been strong. Stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. She heard Soul's voice through the wall, quieter now, almost tentative. "Is it over?" Soul asked. Vex took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "Yes," she said. "It is over." There was a pause, and then Soul said, "I am going to come to the door. I am not going to enter. I am just going to leave you some water and clean clothes. Is that okay?" Vex felt a sob building in her chest, but she forced it down. "Yes," she said again. "That is okay." She heard footsteps in the hallway, the sound of something being placed outside her door, and then Soul's voice again. "Take your time. I will be in the courtyard when you are ready." And then she was gone, leaving Vex alone with the aftermath of the most intimate experience of her life. She stood on shaking legs and walked to the door, opening it just wide enough to retrieve the items Soul had left. There was a pitcher of water, a stack of clean towels, and a set of soft clothes that smelled of lavender. Vex held the clothes to her face and breathed in deeply, and for the first time in her life, she did not flinch away from comfort. She let herself feel it, the warmth, the safety, the absence of threat. She let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have something different. She dressed slowly, her movements deliberate, and then she walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard. Sol was sitting on a bench, her face turned up to the sun, her posture open and vulnerable. Vex watched her for a long time, and then she made a decision. She would go down there. She would talk to her. She would take the first step towards something she had never allowed herself to want. Vex stood at the threshold of the courtyard door for a long time, her hand hovering over the handle, her heart pounding in her chest. She had faced down opponents twice her size in the fighting ring. She had stared death in the face more times than she could count. But walking through that door to talk to Sol felt more terrifying than any fight she had ever been in. Because in a fight, she knew the rules. She knew how to throw a punch and how to take a hit. She knew how to survive. But this was different. This was vulnerability. This was opening herself up to someone who had seen her at her absolute worst and had not taken advantage of it. That was the part she could not understand. Sol had every reason to claim her, to dominate her, to use her heat as an excuse to take what she wanted. Every alpha in the world would have done exactly that. But Sol had not. Sol had locked herself in another building and talked to her through the walls like she was a person, not a prize. She pushed open the door and stepped into the courtyard. The flowers were in full bloom, their colors vivid against the gray stone walls. Sol was sitting on the bench, her face turned up to the weak sunlight, her eyes closed. She looked peaceful in a way that made Vex's chest ache. She did not open her eyes when Vex approached, did not acknowledge her presence in any way except to say, "There is space on the bench if you want it." Vex hesitated for a moment, and then she sat down, leaving as much distance between them as the bench would allow. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but charged with possibility. Vex did not know what to say. She had never been good at talking, had never had the luxury of conversation. Words were weapons or shields, never bridges. "The first time I went through a heat without suppressants," Sol said, her voice soft and contemplative, "I thought I was going to die. I had been running from my biology for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to just exist in my own skin. When the heat hit, it was like being unmade and remade all at once. I did not know how to handle it." Vex turned to look at her, startled by the confession. "You went through that too?" she asked. Sol opened her eyes and smiled, a small sad smile that did not reach her eyes. "I went through worse," she said. "I grew up in a traditional household. My parents were both alphas, and they believed in the old ways. They believed that alphas were meant to dominate and omegas were meant to submit. When I presented as alpha, they were thrilled. They thought I would continue the family legacy." Vex felt a chill run down her spine. She had never considered that alphas might suffer under the system too, that the pressure to be dominant and aggressive might be as suffocating as the pressure to be submissive and nurturing. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sol looked away, her jaw tightening. "I tried to be what they wanted," she said. "I tried to dominate. I tried to claim. I tried to be the alpha they expected me to be. And it almost destroyed me. I hurt people I cared about. I drove away everyone who ever loved me. I became a monster because I thought that was the only way to survive." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "And then I met someone who showed me that it did not have to be that way. An Omega who refused to submit. Who showed me that strength was not about domination, but about choice." Vex felt tears pricking at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She did not cry. She had not cried in years. But something about Sol's story, about the pain and the redemption in her voice, struck a chord deep inside her. "What happened to that Omega?" she asked. Sol smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. "She is still here," she said. "She runs this sanctuary with me. Her name is Kira. She is the one who planted the flowers." Vex looked around at the courtyard with new eyes, seeing the care and love that had gone into every bloom. "She is your mate?" she asked. Sol shook her head. "She is my partner," she said. "We chose each other, but we did not bond." We did not mark. We did not do any of the things that the system tells us we are supposed to do. We simply decided that we wanted to build a life together, and we did it on our own terms. Vex sat with that for a long time, turning it over in her mind. She had never considered that there could be alternatives to the traditional dynamic, that people could choose their relationships rather than being driven by biological imperatives. It was a radical idea, one that challenged everything she had ever believed about the world. I do not know how to do that, she finally said. I do not know how to choose. I have been fighting for so long that I do not know what it looks like to stop. Sol turned to face her fully, her eyes searching Vex's face with a gentleness that made her want to look away. You do not have to know how, Sol said. You just have to be willing to try. That is all any of us can do. We try, and we fail, and we try again. And eventually, we figure out who we want to be. Vex felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of fear and anger that had been coiled in her chest for as long as she could remember. She looked at Sol, really looked at her, and she saw someone who had walked through the same fire and had come out the other side. Someone who understood the pain of being trapped by biology, who had found a way to break free and build something better. Can you teach me? Vex asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Can you teach me how to be something other than what I was born to be? Sol smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through the clouds. I can teach you how to find that answer for yourself, she said. That is the only way it will ever stick. They sat together in the courtyard for the rest of the afternoon, talking about nothing and everything. Sol told Vex about the sanctuary, how it had started as a single room and had grown into a community. She told her about the people who had come and gone, the lives that had been changed, the hope that had been planted in the most unlikely soil. Vex listened, really listened, and she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt hope. It was a fragile thing, barely more than a seedling, but it was there. And for the first time in her life, she did not try to crush it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Vex made a decision. She would stay. She would give this place a chance. She would give herself a chance. She did not know what the future held, did not know if she would ever be able to fully accept what she was, but she knew she could not keep running. Running had gotten her nowhere. It had only brought her to the edge of death, alone and broken and full of poison. It was time to try something different. It was time to stop fighting her own nature and start learning how to live with it. She stood up from the bench and looked down at Sol, who was still sitting with her face turned to the fading light. I want to help, Vex said. I want to do something meaningful. I want to be part of this. Sol looked up at her, and there was a warmth in her eyes that Vex had never seen directed at her before. That is the first step, Sol said. The rest will come in time. Vex nodded, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel the need to run. She felt the need to stay. She felt the need to build something, not a nest, not a cage, but a life. And that was more than she had ever allowed herself to hope for. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of small victories and quiet defeats. Vex threw herself into the work of the sanctuary with a fervor that surprised everyone, including herself. She helped in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring pots under the watchful eye of an elderly beta named Mira who had been cooking for the community for over 20 years. She repaired broken furniture, her fighter's hands surprisingly gentle with the wood and nails. She swept floors and washed windows and did all the mundane tasks that kept the sanctuary running, and she found a strange peace in the repetition. Her body was still recovering from the suppressant withdrawal, and she tired easily, but each day she felt a little stronger, a little more present in her own skin. Sol gave her space to find her own rhythm, appearing at mealtimes and occasional meetings, but never hovering. Vex appreciated that more than she could say. She had spent her entire life being watched, being evaluated, being measured against expectations she had never agreed to. Sol's refusal to impose herself was a gift she did not know how to accept, but she was learning. She was learning to exist without the constant threat of violence, without the need to defend herself against every perceived attack. It was strange and uncomfortable, but it was also freeing in ways she had never imagined. One evening, after the dinner dishes had been cleared away, Soul found Vex in the library. She was sitting in the corner with a book about herbs and their medicinal properties, her brow furrowed in concentration. Soul sat down across from her, her movements casual and unhurried. "You have been here for 3 weeks," she said. "How are you feeling?" Vex looked up from her book, her eyes guarded. "Better," she said. "I do not feel like I am going to collapse anymore. My appetite is back. I can sleep through the night without nightmares." She paused, biting her lip. "I do not know what to do with myself. I have been fighting for so long that I do not know how to just exist." Soul nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "That is a common feeling," she said. "When you have spent years in survival mode, the transition to normal life can be disorienting. You have to learn how to be a person again, not just a fighter. That takes time." Vex closed her book and set it aside, her hands trembling slightly. "I do not know if I can do it," she admitted. "I do not know if I can be anything other than what I was. The fighting was the only thing that made sense. The only thing I was good at." Soul leaned forward, her eyes intense, but not threatening. "You are good at many things, Vex. You just have not had the chance to discover them yet. You have survived things that would have broken most people. That takes strength, resilience, intelligence. Those are skills. They can be applied to other areas of your life." Vex felt tears pricking at her eyes again, and this time she did not try to blink them back. She let them fall, let herself feel the grief and the fear and the hope all at once. "I am scared," she whispered. "I am scared that I will never be able to let go of the anger. I am scared that the poison I put in my body for so many years has damaged me permanently. I am scared that I will never be able to have a normal relationship, that I will always be too broken to connect with anyone." Soul reached out, her hand hovering over Vex without making contact. "Can I touch you?" she asked. Vex nodded, her breath catching in her throat. Soul took her hand, her grip warm and steady. "You are not broken," she said. "You're scarred, yes. You have been through things that no one should have to go through. But scars are not the same as brokenness. Scars are proof of survival. They are reminders that you made it through something terrible and you are still here. And as for relationships, there is no timeline. There is no rule that says you have to be ready by a certain age. You will be ready when you are ready, and that is okay. The people who care about you will wait." Vex squeezed Soul's hand, drawing strength from the contact. She had not let anyone touch her in years, not voluntarily, not without the intent to cause harm. But this was different. This was comfort, pure and simple. "I want to be ready," she said. "I want to be able to trust someone. I want to be able to build something." Soul smiled, a soft and gentle expression that made Vex's heart ache. "You are already building something," she said. "You are building yourself. That is the most important construction project any of us will ever undertake." The moment was interrupted by a knock on the library door. A young Omega woman poked her head in, her expression anxious. "Soul, there is someone at the gate. She is asking for Vex. She says she is from the fighting arena." Vex felt her blood run cold. She knew who it was before the woman even said the name. It was the broker's enforcer, a brutal alpha named Reyes who had been sent to collect debts on more than one occasion. Soul stood up, her body tensing with readiness. "Stay here," she said. "I will handle this." But Vex was already on her feet, her fighter's instincts kicking in. "No," she said. "This is my problem. I need to face it." She walked to the gate with Soul at her side, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. Reyes was standing outside, her massive frame blocking the entrance, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Vex," she said, her voice like gravel. "The broker wants to see you. You owe her money for the last batch of suppressants, and she is not happy that you skipped out on payment." Vex felt the old anger surge up inside her, the familiar rage that had kept her alive for so many years. But this time, something else was there too. Something that felt like strength, not rage. "I am not coming with you," she said. "I am done with the broker. I am done with suppressants. I am done with all of it." Reyes laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "You think you can just walk away? You think you have a choice? The broker owns you, Omega. She owns every part of you, from your body to your biology. She owns your heats, your nests, your entire existence. and she is not in the mood to let her property go. Soul stepped forward, her presence calm but unmistakably commanding. Vex is not property, she said. She is a person. She has the right to make her own choices about her own body. And she has made her choice. She is staying here. Ray's eyes narrowed, taking in Soul with a predatory gaze. And who are you to interfere, Alpha? What is your claim on her? I smell no bond, no mark. She is not yours. So why do you care? Soul did not flinch. I care because she is a human being, she said. I care because I believe in freedom. And I care because I have seen what the broker's poison does to people. I have watched Omegas waste away, their organs failing, their minds crumbling. I will not let that happen to Vex. Not while she is under my protection. Reyes took a step forward, her hand going to the weapon at her belt. You are making a mistake, she said. The broker has connections. She can make your life very difficult. She can shut down this sanctuary. Have you arrested? Have you disappeared? Vex felt the fear spike through her, but she pushed it down. She had faced worse than this. She had faced death in the arena and had walked away. She would not let this bully scare her. Go back to the broker, she said, her voice steady. Tell her that I am done. Tell her that she can have her money, but she cannot have my freedom. I will find a way to pay her back, but I will never take another dose of her poison. Reyes stared at her for a long moment, and then she laughed again, a cold and cruel sound. You are a fool, she said. You think you can escape? You think this little sanctuary will save you? The world does not work that way, Omega. The world is built on the dynamic system, and you cannot opt out. You will always be what you are. And eventually, you will break. They all break. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Vex watched her go, her heart racing, her hands shaking. She felt Soul's hand on her shoulder, warm and grounding. She is wrong, Soul said. The world is changing. People are waking up to the fact that the dynamic system is a lie, a cage built by those in power to control the rest of us. And we're going to tear that cage down, one person at a time. Vex turned to look at her, her eyes bright with unshed tears. How? She asked. How do we tear down something so big? Soul smiled, a fierce and determined smile. One step at a time, she said. We start by helping people like you find their freedom. And then we take down the people who profit from keeping others enslaved. Starting with the broker. Vex felt a surge of determination that matched Soul's. She had been running for so long, hiding from the system that wanted to consume her. But running had not worked. Hiding had not worked. It was time to fight. Not with her fists, but with her truth. Not against her biology, but against the people who used biology as a weapon. She looked at Soul and nodded. Tell me what to do, she said. I am ready. The sanctuary hummed with a new energy in the days following Ray's visit. The residents moved with purpose, their conversations hushed but urgent. Soul had called a meeting in the common room, and nearly everyone had shown up, crowding onto the mismatched chairs and worn sofas that filled the space. Vex stood in the back, her arms crossed over her chest, watching the faces of the people who had chosen this place as their refuge. There were Omegas who had fled abusive alphas, alphas who had rejected the violence of their designation, betas who had been caught in the crossfire of a system that had no place for them. They were all here, together, united by a common desire for freedom. Soul stood at the front of the room, her presence calm but commanding. She did not posture or preen. She simply spoke, her voice carrying to every corner of the space. We have been building this sanctuary for 5 years, she said. We have helped over 100 people escape the dynamic system and find new lives. But we have been operating in the shadows, treating the symptoms rather than the cause. The cause is the broker and everyone like her. People who profit from the suffering of others. People who use biology as a weapon to control and enslave. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Vex felt her own heart pounding in her chest, a familiar adrenaline rush that she had not felt since her last fight. Soul raised her hand for silence. I am not suggesting we go to war, she said. I am suggesting we use our greatest weapon. The truth. The broker operates on secrecy and fear. She keeps her customers isolated, dependent, too afraid to speak out. But if we can bring her operation into the light, if we can show the world what she is doing, we can shut her down without ever throwing a punch. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. How? Someone asked. How do we expose someone who has been operating for decades without being caught? Soul smiled, and there was a glint of something fierce in her eyes. We use the same tools she uses. We use the network of people she has harmed. We gather testimony, evidence, proof of the damage her suppressants have caused. And then we take it to the authorities, not the corrupt ones who are in her pocket, but the ones who are still fighting for justice. Vex stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I can help with that, she said. I know the arena. I know the fighters. I know the people who have been damaged by the broker's products. Some of them are still alive. Some of them are still fighting. If we can reach them, if we can convince them to speak out, we will have all the evidence we need. Soul turned to her, her expression unreadable. That would be dangerous, she said. The arena is not a safe place for someone who has left the life. Rays will be watching for you. The broker will have eyes everywhere. Vex met her gaze without flinching. I know, she said. But I have been fighting my whole life. I am not afraid of a fight. I am afraid of running away from one. The room went silent, everyone staring at Vex with a mixture of shock and admiration. She had not been at the sanctuary long, but her reputation had preceded her. They knew she had been a fighter, a survivor, someone who had clawed her way out of the gutter. And now she was offering to go back into the lion's den for the sake of the community. Soul walked over to her, her footsteps soft on the worn floorboards. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice low enough that only Vex could hear. This is not a fight you can win with your fists. This is a fight that requires patience, cunning, and a willingness to be vulnerable. Can you do that? Vex looked into her eyes and saw the concern there, the genuine care that she still did not know how to accept. I can try, she said. That is all I can promise. The plan began to take shape over the following days. Vex would return to the arena, not as a fighter, but as a scout. She would talk to the people she had known, the fighters and the spectators and the hangers-on who had seen the damage the broker's products had done. She would gather their stories, their testimonies, their evidence. And then she would bring it back to the sanctuary, where Soul and her network would use it to build a case that could not be ignored. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only chance they had. Vex prepared for her mission with the same intensity she had brought to her fights, honing her body and her mind, remembering the skills that had kept her alive in the arena. On the morning of her departure, Soul found her in the courtyard. The flowers were blooming, their colors bright against the gray stone, and Vex was sitting on the bench, her hands clasped in her lap. Soul sat down beside her, close enough to be present, but far enough to give her space. You do not have to do this, she said. There are other ways. We can find other witnesses. We do not have to put you at risk. Vex shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. I know, she said. But I want to do this. I want to contribute something meaningful. I have spent my whole life taking, fighting, surviving. It is time for me to give something back. Soul was silent for a long moment, and then she reached out and took Vex's hand. When you come back, she said, I want you to build a nest. Not for anyone else. Not because you're supposed to. But because you want to. Because you deserve comfort and safety and softness. Because you deserve to feel at home in your own skin. Vex felt tears spring to her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. I do not know how to build a nest, she said. I have never done it before. Soul squeezed her hand gently. I will teach you, she said. When you come back, I will teach you. Vex stood up, her heart full to bursting. She did not know what the future held, did not know if she would survive what she was about to do. But she knew that she had something worth fighting for. Not just freedom, not just survival, but a chance to be whole. A chance to be herself, fully and without apology. She looked at Soul, at the woman who had saved her life and shown her a different way to live, and she made a promise. I will come back, she said. I will come back, and I will build that nest. And you will be the first person I let inside. Soul nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I will be here, she said. I will always be here. Vex walked out of the sanctuary and into the gray streets of the city, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. She had a mission, a purpose, a reason to keep fighting. And for the first time in her life, she was not fighting against something. She was fighting for something. For herself, for Soul, for all the people who deserved a chance at freedom. The arena loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but Vex did not flinch. She walked through the doors with her head held high, ready to face whatever came next. She was no longer just an Omega who refused to nest. She was a woman who had chosen her own path, and she would walk it to the very end. The arena was exactly as Vex remembered it. The same concrete walls weeping moisture, the same metallic scent of old blood, the same desperate energy that crackled through the crowd like static electricity. She stood in the shadows near the entrance, her hood pulled low over her face, watching the familiar spectacle unfold. A beta woman was in the cage, her opponent a massive alpha male who towered over her. The crowd was howling for blood, their voices a mindless roar that Vex had once found comforting. Now it just sounded like noise, like the desperate bleating of people who had nothing better to do than watch others suffer. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, keeping her head down, her body language neutral. She was looking for familiar faces, people she had fought alongside, people she had fought against. The arena was a small world, and she had been part of it for years. She knew the regulars, the fighters, the hangers-on who lived for the thrill of violence. She spotted a woman she recognized, a beta named Jax who had been a medic for the fighters. Jax was sitting in the corner, her face gaunt and her hands shaking. Vex made her way over, sliding into the seat beside her. "Jax," she said, her voice low. "It is me." "Vex." Jax looked up, her eyes unfocused for a moment before recognition dawned. "Vex," she breathed. "I heard you were dead. I heard the broker's enforcer got you." Vex shook her head. "I am not dead. I am very much alive. And I need your help." Jax glanced around nervously, her hands still trembling. "I cannot help you," she said. "I cannot do anything. The broker has eyes everywhere. If she finds out I talk to you, she will kill me." Vex reached out and took Jax's hand, squeezing it gently. "I know you are scared," she said. "I am scared too. But we have a chance to stop her. We have a chance to bring her down. All we need is people like you to speak out, to share what you have seen." Jax stared at her, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "You really think we can beat her?" she asked. "You really think we can win?" Vex nodded, her grip on Jax's hand tightening. "I know we can. But only if we work together. Only if we are brave enough to speak the truth." Jax was silent for a long moment, and then she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I will help you. I have seen things, terrible things. People who were destroyed by the broker's suppressants. People who died because they could not afford the next dose. I will tell you everything." Vex spent the next several hours talking to Jax, gathering information that made her blood run cold. The broker's operation was larger than she had ever imagined. She was not just selling suppressants, she was selling hope, and she was charging a price that people could not afford to pay. She had a network of dealers and enforcers, a system of control that extended throughout the entire city. And she had connections in the government, corrupt officials who looked the other way in exchange for a cut of her profits. It was a vast and intricate web, and taking it down would be like fighting a hydra. But Vex was determined. She had come too far to give up now. She left the arena just before dawn, her mind spinning with everything she had learned. She made her way back to the sanctuary through the back alleys, avoiding the main streets where she might be spotted. The city was waking up around her, the first gray light of dawn creeping over the crumbling buildings. She felt a strange sense of peace, a calm that came from knowing she was doing something meaningful. For the first time in her life, she was not just surviving. She was fighting for something bigger than herself. Soul was waiting for her at the gate, her face etched with worry. "You are back," she said, her voice thick with relief. "I was so worried." Vex stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Soul, pulling her into a hug that surprised them both. "I am okay," she said. "I am okay. And I have information. A lot of information." Soul held her tightly, her hand stroking Vex's hair. "We can talk about that later," she said. Right now, you need to rest. You look exhausted. Vex nodded, too tired to argue. She let Soul lead her inside, let her guide her to her room, let her help her lie down on the soft bed that had been prepared for her. She fell asleep almost instantly, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion that had been building for days. She dreamed of the arena, of the fights, of the blood and the noise, and the desperate hunger of the crowd. But she also dreamed of Soul, of her calm voice and steady presence, of the safety she had found in the sanctuary. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky, streaming through the window in golden beams. She felt rested, stronger than she had in years. She sat up and looked around the room, noticing for the first time the small touches that made it feel like home. A vase of flowers on the windowsill. A stack of books on the nightstand. A blanket folded at the foot of the bed that smelled of lavender and cedar. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the courtyard. Soul was there, sitting on the bench, her face turned up to the sun. Vex felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she did not have a name for. She walked down to the courtyard and sat beside Soul, their shoulders almost touching. "I am ready," she said. "I am ready to build that nest." Soul turned to her, her eyes soft and full of love. "Are you sure?" she asked. "There is no rush. You can take as much time as you need." Vex shook her head. "I have been running for too long," she said. "I am tired of running. I want to build something. I want to create a space that is mine, a space where I can feel safe and whole. And I want you to be part of it." Soul smiled, a radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "I would be honored," she said. They spent the rest of the day gathering materials, soft fabrics and pillows and blankets that Soul had been collecting for just this purpose. Vex worked slowly, deliberately, arranging each piece with care. She had never built a nest before, had never allowed herself the comfort of creating a space that was truly hers. But as she worked, she felt something shift inside her. The fear that had held her back for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of peace and belonging. She was not building a cage. She was building a home. And that made all the difference. The nest took shape over the course of several days, a labor of love that Vex approached with the same intensity she had once brought to her fights. She collected soft fabrics in shades of blue and gray, colors that reminded her of the sky and the sea, things she had never allowed herself to dream of. She arranged pillows in careful layers, building walls of comfort that enclosed a space just large enough for two. She added blankets that smelled of lavender and cedar, the scents that had become associated with safety in her mind. And when she was finished, she stood back and looked at what she had created, and she felt tears streaming down her cheeks. It was not a cage. It was not a trap. It was a sanctuary within a sanctuary, a space she had built for herself, by herself, on her own terms. She had never understood why Omegas built nests, had always seen it as a sign of weakness, a surrender to biology. But now she understood. A nest was not about submission. It was about creation. It was about taking raw materials and shaping them into something beautiful and functional and deeply personal. It was an act of agency, not surrender. And she had done it. She had built something with her own hands, something that was entirely hers. Soul came to see the nest on the evening of its completion. She stood at the doorway, her eyes wide with wonder. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is the most beautiful nest I have ever seen." Vex felt a flush of pride that surprised her. "Do you want to come inside?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Soul nodded, her movements slow and deliberate as she stepped into the nest and settled among the pillows. Vex joined her, their bodies close but not touching, the space between them charged with possibility. "I never thought I would do this," Vex said. "I never thought I would want to do this. But it feels right. It feels like coming home." Soul reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining. "You're home," she said. "You have always been home. You just did not know it yet." Vex felt a sob building in her chest, and she let it out, letting the tears flow freely. She had spent so many years holding everything in, suppressing every emotion, every instinct, every part of herself that made her vulnerable. But here, in this nest, with this woman, she did not have to hold anything in. She could be soft. She could be weak. She could be everything she had been taught to despise. And it was okay. It was more than okay. It was freedom. They lay together in the nest for hours, talking about nothing and everything. Sol told Vex about her childhood, about the pressure to be the perfect alpha, about the years she had spent trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for her. Vex told Sol about her mother and sister, about watching them surrender to the system, about the rage that had driven her to fight. They shared their pain and their hopes, their fears and their dreams. And in the sharing, they found a connection that went deeper than biology, deeper than designation, deeper than anything the world had taught them to believe. "I do not know what the future holds," Vex said, her voice soft in the dim light. "I do not know if we will be able to take down the broker. I do not know if we will succeed. But I know that I want to try. I know that I want to do it with you." Sol turned to face her, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We will do it together," she said. "We will face whatever comes, side by side. And no matter what happens, we will have each other. That is all that matters." The next morning, Vex woke in the nest with Sol's arms wrapped around her. It was the first time she had ever slept in a nest, the first time she had ever allowed herself to be held, and it was the most peaceful sleep she had ever had. She lay there for a long time, savoring the warmth and the safety, before finally stirring. Sol woke too, her eyes fluttering open with a sleepy smile. "Good morning," she said. Vex smiled back, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Good morning," she said. "Are you ready to take down an empire?" Sol laughed, a joyful sound that filled the room. "I am ready," she said. "Are you?" Vex nodded, her heart full of purpose. "I am ready. Let us go." They spent the next several weeks gathering evidence, building their case against the broker. Vex returned to the arena multiple times, talking to fighters and dealers and anyone else who would listen. She gathered testimony, photographs, medical records that showed the damage the broker's suppressants had caused. Sol used her network to reach out to sympathetic journalists and government officials, people who were willing to listen to the truth. The case grew and grew, a mountain of evidence that could not be ignored. And finally, the day came when they were ready to go public. Vex stood in the sanctuary's common room, surrounded by the people she had come to think of as her family. Sol was beside her, her hand in Vex, their fingers intertwined. "Today," Sol said, her voice ringing out clear and strong, "we take the first step toward tearing down the system that has held us captive for so long. Today, we speak the truth. And the truth will set us free." A cheer went up from the crowd, a roar of hope and determination that filled the room. Vex felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was not ashamed. She was proud. Proud of what they had accomplished, proud of the people who had stood with her, proud of the woman she had become. They released their evidence to the press, a coordinated effort that flooded every news outlet in the city. The story was picked up by national media, then international media. The broker's operation was exposed, her network of dealers and enforcers brought to light. The corrupt officials who had protected her were arrested, their careers destroyed. And the broker herself was taken into custody, her empire crumbling around her. Vex watched the news coverage with a sense of disbelief. It had actually worked. They had actually done it. In the aftermath, Vex found herself sitting in the courtyard, surrounded by the flowers that Kira had planted. Sol sat beside her, their shoulders touching, their hands clasped together. "We did it," Vex said, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually did it." Sol nodded, a smile on her face. "We did it," she said. "But this is just the beginning. There are other brokers, other systems of oppression. The fight is not over. It will never be over." Vex looked at her, at the woman who had changed everything, and she felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. "I know," she said. "But I am ready. I am ready to fight for as long as it takes. As long as I have you by my side." The months that followed the downfall of the broker were a time of transformation for the sanctuary and everyone in it. The city was changing too, slowly but surely, as the exposure of the corruption at the highest levels sent shockwaves through the system. People who had been too afraid to speak out were finding their voices, sharing their stories, demanding better. The old ways were crumbling, and in their place, Something new was being built. Vex watched it all with a sense of wonder, a feeling she had never allowed herself to experience. She had spent so many years fighting against the world that she had forgotten how to hope for it. But now, hope was all around her, tangible and real. She had stopped taking suppressants entirely. It had been a difficult decision, one that she had wrestled with for weeks. The withdrawal had been brutal, the return of her heats terrifying. But she had endured it, had come through the other side stronger and more whole than she had ever been. Her body was healing, the damage from years of poison slowly repairing itself. She had energy she had not felt since she was a teenager. She had clarity of mind that made her wonder how she had ever functioned in the fog of suppressants. And she had a peace that she had never believed possible. Soul had been with her every step of the way, a constant presence of support and love. They had not bonded in the traditional sense, had not marked each other or performed any of the rituals that the system demanded. But they had built something deeper than that, a connection that was based on choice rather than biology. Vex had chosen Soul. Soul had chosen Vex. And that choice was more powerful than any biological imperative could ever be. They shared a bed, a nest, a life. They worked together, laughed together, cried together. They were partners in every sense of the word, and Vex had never been happier. One evening, as the sun set over the courtyard, Vex found herself thinking about her mother and sister. She had not seen them in years, had not spoken to them since she had left home at 17. She had been so angry at them for giving in, for accepting the system that had destroyed their potential. But now she understood. They had not given in because they were weak. They had given in because they were scared, because they had been told their whole lives that there was no other way. She felt a surge of compassion for them, a desire to reach out and reconnect. She talked to Soul about it that night, lying in the nest with her head on Soul's shoulder. "I want to find them," she said. "I want to tell them that there is another way. I want to show them that they do not have to be defined by what they were born as." Soul was silent for a moment, and then she said, "That is a beautiful idea. But you have to be prepared for the possibility that they might not want to hear it. They might be too entrenched in the old ways to see the truth." Vex nodded, her heart heavy. "I know," she said. "But I have to try. I have to at least give them the chance to choose something different." Soul kissed the top of her head, a gesture of such tenderness that Vex felt tears prick at her eyes. "Then I will go with you," she said. "Whatever happens, we will face it together." Vex turned in her arms and looked up at her, at the woman who had changed everything. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I love you, and I do not know how to say it in a way that does justice to what I feel." Soul smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You just did," she said. "That was perfect. That was everything." They found Vex's mother and sister living in a small apartment on the other side of the city. The reunion was awkward and painful at first, years of silence and resentment hanging between them. But Vex was patient, more patient than she had ever been. She told them about the sanctuary, about Soul, about the life she had built for herself. She told them that she had stopped taking suppressants, that she had embraced her biology on her own terms. She told them that there was another way, a way that did not require submission or domination, a way that was based on choice and freedom. Her sister, a quiet Omega named Lyra, was the first to break. She started crying, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. "I thought I was alone," she said. "I thought I was the only one who felt trapped." Vex wrapped her arms around her sister, holding her tightly. "You are not alone," she said. "You have never been alone. And you do not have to stay trapped. There is a way out if you want it." Her mother watched them, her expression a mixture of pain and hope. "I was so scared," she said. "I was so scared of what would happen if I fought back. I thought it was better to just accept it, to make the best of a bad situation." Vex reached out and took her mother's hand. "I know," she said. "I understand. But you do not have to be scared anymore. The world is changing, and you can change with it." It took time, but eventually, Vex's mother and sister agreed to come to the sanctuary. They were hesitant at first, unsure of what to expect. But the warmth and acceptance they found there slowly won them over. They started to heal, to grow, to become the people they had always wanted to be. Vex watched them with a sense of pride and joy that she had never expected to feel. She had not just saved herself. She had saved them too. The sanctuary continued to grow, expanding to accommodate the influx of people seeking refuge from the crumbling system. Sol and Kira worked tirelessly to keep it running, their vision of a world without force dynamics slowly becoming a reality. Vex found her own role, using her experience in the arena to help people who were struggling with anger and trauma. She became a counselor, a mentor, a guide for people who were walking the same path she had walked. She understood their pain because she had lived it, and she could show them that there was another way. On a warm summer evening, Vex sat in the courtyard with Sol, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The flowers were in full bloom, their colors vivid and alive. Vex leaned her head on Sol's shoulder, feeling the warmth of her body, the steady beat of her heart. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for saving me." Sol turned to look at her, her eyes soft with love. "You saved yourself," she said. "I just showed you that it was possible." Vex smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Then thank you for showing me," she said. "Thank you for showing me that I could be free." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The world was changing, slowly but surely. The old system was crumbling, and something new was being built in its place. Vex did not know what the future held, but she knew that she would face it with Sol by her side. She had come so far from the woman who had refused to nest, who had fought her biology with every ounce of her strength. She was no longer fighting. She was living. And that was the greatest victory of all. The nest she had built was still there, a soft and welcoming space that she retreated to when she needed comfort. But she no longer needed it the way she once had. She had found comfort in herself, in her relationship with Sol, in the community she had helped to build. She was no longer defined by what she was born as. She was defined by her choices, her actions, her love. And that was more than enough. She was free.